right, y'all are welcome to start your videos and kick it off.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you've joined us. My name is Manny Pelaez. I am your city councilman for District 8. I've been your city councilman District 8 for 4 years, and 4 years running, we've done a seminar like this regarding property taxes and how to understand property taxes, how to protest them, and what you should expect that process to be, and then really give you some good tips on and best practices on how to make sure that the result that comes from filing your protest is the best result you can get. And so there's a lot of myths out there, there's a lot of questions, and today we are going to answer all of them. Rules. Let's make sure that if you have any good questions, you ask those questions on our Facebook page that you're watching right now, and just enter those questions down below, and we will make sure that you have answers. Okay, so let me introduce you to my guests. When I decided to put out the search for people that know what they're talking about, I never thought that I would get the two most knowledgeable guys in all of Texas when it comes to property taxes. And I did, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you again. Gary Rivas is here, and he's joining us from SWBC's Ad Valorem Tax Advisors, which is one of the big divisions out there at SWBC. And he's the president of this of Ad Valorem Tax Advisors at SWBC. Now, he's been doing this for 30 years. He's been representing businesses, small and large, and homeowners, with these real world multi-angled tax issues. And he is a trusted advisor. And he is in charge of the day-to-day operations over at this Ad Valorem division, including the management of the administrative and professional agent staff and contract negotiations for the services. Now, before that, he was heading up the J. Joseph Consulting, which was also an Ad Valorem tax operation. And he also worked at Adam and Polonsky Ad Valorem Tax Advisors from 91 to 2005. There is nobody out there with more experience in real estate sales, development, construction. And he's also a licensed senior property tax consultant providing advisory services in real estate and personal property, industrial exemptions, special valuation disciplines. He is also, because that's not enough, one of the members of the board for the Texas Association of Property Tax Professionals, and he is also a real estate agent, and he's got his license now. Jerry Jerka is on the phone. Jerry, welcome. You've also, he is a vice president of property appeals at SWBC, and he used to be at Adams and Polonsky as well for 17 years. And before that, he was in-house at the Dallas Central Appraisal District. And so really, he knows how the sausage is made because he worked at the sausage factory, right? And he's involved today in technical representation of individual residential properties, and he works with the hearing agents over at BCAD to discuss and develop the appropriate strategies to employ in legal and ethical tax mitigation efforts. I know these gentlemen have a ton of work to do, but when I said, hey, do you mind helping your fellow neighbors in San Antonio understand, they said, we will drop everything, Councilman, come to your aid, and we're gonna bring you some good information. So we are going to basically just kick it off. Gary, Jerry, the name of the game, but this is a different year. We're mid-pandemic. There's now a whole bunch of little claims and big claims having to do with broken pipes and damaged houses and buildings. And I understand that there may be something that people can bring up at their Bexar County Appraisal District protests regarding, broken pipes and damage to their homes and properties. And maybe you can teach us about that. But just generally speaking, fellas, how does 2021's taxing scheme look like compared to last year's? Has anything changed?
Well, number one, let me give you thanks for that introduction. Boy, I feel really old now with all that stuff that you just said. So we really appreciate you inviting us back, Councilman Pelaez. Obviously, Jerry and I are always very happy to participate in your property tax town halls, and we hope that people are able to walk away with a little grain and some nuggets here and there of information that they can use to help with their taxpayer protests this year. So yeah, what you mentioned, what's going on. It's last year obviously was highly affected by the pandemic, and timetables were thrown upside down. I think when we did this program last year, there were still a lot of uncertainties in the air. Some of the deadlines had been pushed back or what yet to be determined. Even the appraisal district, along with some of the local governments, were calling for property values to essentially roll forward from the prior year. Unfortunately, that did not happen. It was ruled by I guess, the governor and the comptroller together. They decided that that was not the legal remedy to do to provide any type of relief. So it turned out to be, I won't say business as usual, but unfortunately, appraisal districts were saddled with the burden of they stood on January 1, which was a pre-pandemic time frame. So then we started looking at, well, there's this new exemption. We'll get into this a little bit later. But hey, there's this new temporary exemption for properties, that are affected by disasters. And like I said, we'll touch on a little bit more, but ultimately that was overruled by an attorney general's opinion that said that relief was not available to property owners because the damage must be of physical nature and not economic. So that relief went away, but there is an opportunity this year. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But hey, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and let's go ahead and get started with us trying to help you learn how to be your own property tax advocate and what you can do to lower some of your property taxes. So with that, you heard Jerry's introduction. Boy, Jerry's down there at the appraisal district every day, ins and outs, not only Bexar County, but several other jurisdictions around the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry to actually, no, I'll take this one, Jerry. You've got a lot of the other details coming on, but let's go ahead and start with the appraisal protest process. And I'm just going to do a little overview for now to give you just, visually a timeline of what takes place during the course of the appraisal year. And everything is predicated off the condition of the property on January 1. What are the market value conditions, as well as what are the physical conditions of the property on January 1. And that is the target date that the appraisal district in San Antonio, that would be the Bear Appraisal District, they are charged with determining what that market value is as of January 1. And so what do they do to do that? They analyze market sales that are available via MLS or people telling the appraisal district what they paid for properties, but they try to get that information from any sources that are available to determine what that market value is. So what happens next? Well, in what actually coming up very shortly in the next couple of weeks, beginning around April, the appraisal district, after they had done their previous months of research, they will start generating notices of appraised values beginning early April. And that continues on throughout the month. They've got quite a caseload of properties to appraise. And I think they end up mailing out close to 700,000 notices in the mail. So keep an eye on your mailbox. Those value notices should be arriving within the next couple of weeks. And on that notice that you receive is what's called a notice of protest deadline. That is a date that is particular to your property, depending on when that value notice was mailed. So typically, if they send it out in time that they give you at least 30 days notice, that's typically May 15th. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. And then last but not least, you get to meet with the appraisal district. And Jerry will dig into some of this a little bit more on what that looks like. Last year was a COVID year. The appraisal district shut down, and property owners weren't allowed to physically go in their offices and make their appeals. So there's other ways that they had to adjust to it. And I think the appraisal district did a really good job in light of the fact of our current conditions. I think they did a good job in accommodating taxpayers in providing them the opportunity to share any pertinent information and the individual characteristics that apply to your individual property. Make sure you get that over to them, and then y'all basically can work out that appraised value. So that's the value settlement negotiation part, whether you can do that through the informal process, or if you're not satisfied with the appraisal district's offer to settle at a certain value, then you can continue to appeal that forward. But I'm going to turn it over to Jerry at this point, and he will take us down the road from there.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Yeah, hopefully our tips can save you guys some money. This next slide, the home value is always as of January 1st. That's bad in the fact that, let's say you have fire damage January 3rd. Well, unfortunately, per the law, it's as your house sits on January 1st. So if you had significant damage after the 1st, you wouldn't really be able to claim that until the following tax year. So another tip is, if you have work done before January 1st, that's not going to be helpful either, because as of January 1st, everything is finished. So if you have any invoices or any estimates for repair after January 1st, then the assumption is, so let's say you have roof repaired in February. The assumption is that on January 1st, that needed a roof repair. So you should be able to discount your appraisal with those estimates. The next slide. Appraisals, home values arrive April to May. Gary kind of spoke to that. We're right up here where those notices are coming out. If you don't get a notice, by law, the appraisal district does not have to send a notice if it doesn't go up by more than $1,000. So if you don't receive a notice by May, you probably want to check online to make sure nothing's wrong. That would be good news, because that means that your appraisal wouldn't go up. It's highly unlikely in this market. What we're hearing is typically going to be an increase of about 8% on residential. So I'm doubting that there's going to be too many rolled values, but they do it by neighborhoods. And so every year you're going to have some that don't go up. And if your value doesn't go up, then you would not receive a notice. But you still want to protest, even those in the situations. Oftentimes, if the value doesn't go up, that means that maybe that the house, your neighborhood that you're in, had some lower sales. And so you can even protest that and get it even lower. So no matter what the value does, we always recommend to everyone that they should protest every year, just to check the equity and the market in your neighborhood.
Yeah, Jerry, let me jump in right there. I sat in on a meeting with 4 of the highest population chief appraisers in Texas from Bexar County, Harris County, which is Houston, Dallas County, and Travis County. And it was fairly unanimous in their opinion on what residential market values we're going to experience. And based on the sales data that they were getting, you're right, they're anticipating market value increases from last year to this year to be between 8 and 10% increase. So get ready. Even though COVID kicked in, the sales were, they declined for a little bit right when COVID kicked in March, April, but they rapidly picked up pace again, and they just bucked the trend and they went through the roof. So be ready for those that sticker price shock when those values come out on many of the residential properties.
If you have your homestead, they're limited to, they cannot tax you on more than a 10% increase, but they can raise it more than 10%. And so you'll see a difference between assessed value and market value. So just an example, if you had a $100,000 house and they raise it to 130, if it's homestead, they can only tax you on 110, 10% higher. And so with these high increases that the appraisal districts are proposing, you're probably going to see a lot of increases above your homestead cap. And so that's something we can touch on in more detail, but that's going to be common this year with the high increases.
Yeah, Jerry, going back to whether people receive a value notice or not, you want to point out what the website is for people to be able to go online and double check and basically just kind of monitor it.
The I think we have it at the end of our presentation, but that's
okay.
PCADA.org. And yeah, so if you don't get a notice by May, you're going to want to go to the Bear Appraisal District website and see what your value did. And even if it stayed the same, we recommend protesting it, but that's where you go to find out. So moving on to the next slide. Now the deadline is May 15th. Now, of course, depending on when they send you your notice, you get 30 days after the day they mail it. And so it's going to have your protest deadline on your hearing notice. But just the rule of thumb, typically the majority, especially residential, because those values go out early, more than likely it's going to be May 15th. And so we always try to protest our clients by May 15th. There is a chance that you could have a later deadline, but to be safe, you kind of want to keep it as May 15th. And then on the protest form, you want to be certain to check both market value and value not equal with others. There's different categories, and by checking both of those boxes, that will allow you the widest type of evidence, and it will preserve all your rights. Technically, if you only checked that you couldn't sell it for that much, then that's only market value, and you can't get into the what we call equity, but it's also referred to as equal and uniform argument. So you want to be certain on your protest form to check both boxes, and that will allow you to discuss everything possible regarding to try to get a better value on your house. Get the next slide there. Gary, you were going to speak to this temporary.
Yeah. Boy, I know my kids love the heck out of the snow when it came a couple of times early this year, but boy, that snow came with the price, and it boy, all the power outages and the lost water and the potential damage that some of those burst pipes may have caused could have been significant. And so a couple of years ago, in the previous legislative year, a bill was enacted that actually went into effect late last year. I believe it was in November of 19, that allows for a temporary exemption for properties damaged in a natural disaster, provided the governor declares a county or the state a natural disaster area, of which Governor Abbott did do that. And that occurred, I believe, on February the 12th or 13th. I think it was the 13th. And that opened the door for potential property tax relief for properties that may have suffered damage. It's a temporary exemption that would not cover the first 40-something days, I forget, of the year, but it would be a prorated exemption based on the level of damage that a property experienced. And so I believe there's a 4-tier system. Whereas if you can demonstrate that your property at the tier 1 level, that it at least suffered 15% damage to the improvement, and you could document that, or at least convince the appraisal district that your property did suffer at least 15% of the improvement value, then you could very, very well be eligible to that temporary exemption. So for instance, take a $100,000 improvement value. I'm not talking about the land. The exemption would not apply to the land value. So you need to segregate the improvement value. When I say improvement value, that is the structures that sit on the property. So you would take your house value only and figure out what 15% of that is, and that would be your minimum threshold for you to apply for this exemption. So in other words, if you had a $100,000 improvement value, you need $15,000 of damages to be able to not apply. Anybody can apply, but to be able to convince the appraisal district that you qualify for that exemption. If you've got a higher percentage of damage, well, then the percentages go up. but the tier 1 level is 15%. The tier 2 level damage, which if you can justify between 30 and 60% damage of the improvements, that would allot for a 30% exemption, and so on. 60 to 100 percent would qualify for levels for tiers 3 and 4. So it's still a pretty tall order to reach that minimum threshold. Typically, if you know you had some burst pipes and it caused you several $1,000s of damage, you just may not be able to get there with that. But what we would strongly encourage you is to take it up with your insurance companies. It's not property tax relief, but you must take this up with your insurance companies to see if you have the proper coverage to help offset some of those damages. But next slide, please. Let me see if that deadline is on there. Oh, no, that's back to Jerry. So I was going back, I think I saw it earlier. May 28th is the deadline to apply for that disaster temporary exemption this year. So and that's prorated again from the time of the date of the event, which was, I believe, February 13th or 14th. So again, double check your damages with your improvement values. And if you don't think it meets that minimum 15% threshold, then absolutely make sure you're discussing this with your insurance agent. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, yeah, this next slide, just as far as timelines when you get hearings set. In the old days, when we used to go down in person, you'd always have an informal and then a week later, you're formal. Now, with it either being over the internet or on the phone, you're going to have some back and forth in an informal setting to settle the value with the appraiser. And then at that time, you'll have an ARB hearing set. But the vast majority of cases are settled informally. So we're gonna give tips for the informal and formal, but did want to just really point out that more than likely there's a good chance you can settle your case informally. Next slide. And then here's some tips, just to be prepared when you do talk. Now, of course, you're not going in person again this year, but you're going to want to send all the data. The easiest way to get a reduction is because with mass appraisal, the appraisal districts don't often have correct information on how many baths, the size of your house. And so that's the first thing you want to look at. If you've never protested before, you want to make sure that the description on your property is accurate with size and different amenities in the house. And then what you can protest, like we said before, we recommend that you always check excessive value and unequal. You can also protest exemptions if one is denied, and you can even do failure to receive notice. And then again, we've got here the filing deadline is either going to be 30 days after the date of notice, but the vast majority deadline is going to be May 15th. And you can do either written or electronic protest. You cannot fax. You have to do either written or electronic. The next slide there. Doing your homework. Little tips. You probably want to reach out to your realtor to get sales. When you protest, the district will give an evidence packet, and it will have a good number of sales in it. You want to reach out to your realtor to make sure there's not any sales missed. Appraisals are good. Those are a little less common to have, but if you happen to have a bank appraisal on hand, you want to go ahead and show that if it's helpful. The equal and uniform research, you're going to be able to get all of that data off of the Bexar County Appraisal District website. Just a common mistake that I hear, when I used to be down there every day and listening to taxpayers is a price per square foot adjustment is, because they'll look at their neighbors and they'll say, hey, I'm on for 150, everybody else is on for 120. Well, you want to be certain that those have to be adjusted. Typically, the adjustments are for size and age, but the district also has a condition category, class category, and so just a raw square foot price comparison is useful, and it's a good starting point. but be prepared to get a little pushback on that from the appraisal district, because they're going to want to adjust those comps depending on the differences between your house and the neighbors. Bring photos. Any photos of damage is a great way to get a reduction. You want to limit it to 5, you know, because they're not going to, and that's for informal and formal. Really, they really can't look. You know, just a tip to get around that limit is, you know, if you have some pictures that you got to show and there's more than 5, just put them on one page, and then each page will count as like a photo itself. But they do have limitations on photos that you can show. Don't wait until the last day. Just going over these final tips. Base your appeal on merits, not emotions. You know, you don't want to bring up the fact that it's raising your tax, because the appraisal district is just concerned with the appraisal on your house. That's what they're saying. They're supposed to determine what your house would sell for on January 1st. And so you don't want to argue that the taxes are too high, because they don't have, you know, obviously it's related, but they don't set the tax rates. And so you don't want to really bring that up at your informal hearing. Remember, of course, always as of January 1st, most appeals will be informally resolved, and then protest every year, even, you know, no matter what your value does. It's good to get the current, because another tip is how they're basing your value is they're taking the first quarter of this year and all the sales from the prior year. And so once a sale is for residential, this is not necessarily true for commercial properties, but on residential, once a sale is over a year old, they're typically not going to use that sale. There are rare cases where there's just no sales and they may go back a year, but the vast majority is all going to be done in the last year, calendar year, and the first quarter of this year. Now you can present, if your hearing's not until June, by all means present a sale that you're aware of in June. The reason why they're only using the first quarter is because they have to have a cutoff when they send the notices. But that data should still be relevant. Any sales that have occurred in the current year is actually going to be great information. Next slide.
Hey Jerry, just for anybody who may not realize what the equal and uniform is, that's when you're comparing your values to your next door neighbors, people down the street. And it's basically, it's not a method of appraisal, but the tax code allows, actually that's the Texas Constitution, that all valuations be equal and uniform. And so even if there are sales that might indicate that values should be higher, they're not supposed to sales chase. So they're not supposed to pick on that one guy who sold his property way higher than everybody else, and then they apply that sale to only him. They must apply it evenly and uniformly across all residences, all properties, whether it's residential or even commercial. They must apply that sale, if one is even enough to do that. One sale doesn't make a market, but they must treat everybody fairly. And so the appraisal districts are prohibited from chasing that sale, and we still see it. They may not, they may raise the value significantly close to the purchase price, but it might be a hair underneath it. They're getting close enough to get your sales price. But again, if they only singled you out and they didn't raise other comparable properties, that's an argument to present to either the informal appraiser or to the appraisal review board.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say that, oh, I could sell my house for more than that. And that may be true, but that doesn't mean that there's not a potential tax savings with the equal and uniform protest.
Right.
And by lowering your value, you're also helping your neighbors by keeping the values low. Because if you get a reduction, then your neighbors could also benefit that potentially. The only real, I didn't point out, when you get your 65 exemption, just touching base on this real quick, what happens is not your appraised value, but the amount paid on most of the jurisdictions, the city, the county, the school, they put a tax ceiling. And so those taxes can never go up as long as you don't add an improvement to the property. And so an over 65 is the one example where you may not want to protest your house. That ceiling is set on the lower of your 2 years, 65, 66. So by all means, you definitely want to protest both those years. But when you turn 67, your taxes aren't going to go up. And if you do go down and protest your value and fight it down, you may actually be hurting yourself in a way, because if you move, and let's say you move when you're 70, you get to port over the percent difference that you're enjoying when you turn 65. And so the reason why you wouldn't want to fight your taxes when you're 67 is you're not saving any tax money, and you also potentially might be hurting your port should you ever move. And so, you know, I've said several times, by all means, protest every year, but that is one example that you would not probably protest if you're 67 unless there's some special circumstances. This next slide on the screen is just basically saying, you know, all the documentation that we've brought up informally, you want to go ahead and submit that. And then you have your meeting informal. It's called informal because, you know, it's basically just talking with the appraiser. And then if you're unable to settle, you go to the formal hearing, and it, you know, it's just somewhat held kind of like a court case, a little mini court case. You can expect 15 minutes to 20 minutes tops. They're not going to really let you go over, and you are placed under oath. But the formal hearing is your time to formally object to the fact that you couldn't settle. You still think it's too high. And it's a necessary step. I hear a lot of taxpayers too that say, "Oh, I'm gonna take you to court. I'm gonna sue." You cannot sue or arbitrate without going to the formal hearing. And so so if you're really upset about your value and you want to pursue it further, this is a necessary step. And hopefully, with the tips we give, you can win your case at the formal hearing, and it'd be done then. The next slide. Okay, ways to appear at the formal hearing. Again, pre-COVID, pretty much everybody went in person, but now they actually send it. Your hearing is by phone, and you actually have to request, you know, to go in person. You still have that right, but the phone hearings are done essentially the same way. But you're also going to do an affidavit when you send in your data for the formal hearing. You're going to complete an affidavit, and that's protection too. If for some reason you can't make the hearing at the last minute, the affidavit's there, and that'll cover you. It will get read in, and it protects your rights going forward should something happen and you're not able to attend that hearing. Okay, next slide there. Ways to appear at the formal hearing. This just continued. You know, this speaks on you can do a written affidavit. And present your case that way. It holds all the rights as if you were there in person. But the telephone conferences where the board members are there in person, but the appraiser is calling in, you calling in, that was the majority of how it was done last year. And I anticipate that probably being the case this year. Okay, next slide. Formal hearing process. Basically, oftentimes it'll be a 3-member panel. There'll be a chairman and 2 more board members, and sometimes they'll give you the option of going first or second, but typically the appraiser will read in the description of your property, and then you present your case first. You want to be sure to have a request. You don't want to go in and say, "I want to get it as low as possible." You want to have an actual number. You know, you're going to have 2 protests, market and equal and uniform. If you only have evidence for one, you can say that my number is for both market and equal and uniform, and just present your best case that you have. Of course, the appraiser is then going to have an opportunity to state the district's case, and the ARB can ask questions, and then they'll go back one last time for a closing statement from you. And then once the chairman closes the hearing, no more evidence can be presented, and they'll decide the case right there. This year it's going to be, you're going to get a result right there on the phone if you're not in person, and then you have an option of either pursuing it to arbitration or litigation if you're unhappy there. But you know, most of the cases are settled informally, and then a good chunk are settled at this formal hearing. Get the next slide there, and then we're up to questions.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that formal hearing process. I'm hearing, I'm just trying to think from the average taxpayer who's not in the day-to-day protesting process. I'm hearing things like affidavits and hearings and panels and so forth. It does sound all very intimidating, but it really doesn't have to be, especially with the new methods of presenting your evidence. Did you talk about that, how to present that evidence through the portal or anything, Jake? I don't recall.
Yeah, the evidence that you submit informally will then, there'll be a special form. It'll be an affidavit, and you'll fill that affidavit out and submit it online, by email to the appraisal district. And then when your hearing is actually heard over the phone, all your evidence that you're talking to will be available on the screen for the ARB.
Right, but I believe the appraisal district provides an affidavit form, or it's on the notice or the form itself. It sounds so legalistic.
Yeah.
Councilman's probably thinking, "Hey, that's my arena. I'll take care of those affidavits." But it's very simple to do. Any taxpayer can handle that on their own. It sounds difficult, but it's really not. We don't. The last thing we want to do is scare anybody on how difficult the process might be. It's not that scary. Anybody can do it. And we encourage you to do it. You don't need to go hire even consultants like Jerry and myself. Many of these things can be handled on your own. Yes, you will have to do your homework. Yes, you will have to make sure that you're following the guidelines that the appraisal district sets out. But you can also call them, and if you're stuck, you can call the appraisal district, and they'll help walk you through a lot of these things. So they do a really good job of their public outreach and trying to help the public take advantage of it. It's not as scary a process as it might seem. It absolutely does take some time to get prepared, but you can do it. And obviously here at SWBC, we're here to help. We're here to provide you with any guidelines or guidance to navigate the process along the way. So I see the next slide on here is property tax resources. So as you prepare your appeals, your presentation to the appraisal district, these are some resources that you might find very helpful as you get your case ready. The Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts, you can go download a lot of the forms that you need. If you didn't receive a value notice, which a value notice does contain on the flip side of that, you could file a protest on that same form, which is very convenient. But if for some reason, say you lost your value notice or you didn't get one, you can go to the Texas Comptroller's website and download a form. Just access the property tax system over there. It's a very intuitive website to navigate, or give them a call. They'll walk you through it. They have a property tax department. They're glad to help out any way they can. Obviously, the Bear Appraisal District, Jerry mentioned the website, www.bcad.org. That is a wealth of information that they have there as well for Bear County. They did a really good job of explaining the temporary exemption that we were talking about a little bit earlier. You can find all the details of what to do to apply for that exemption on their website as well. We also have the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. They're not going to help you a whole lot with filing of the forms or walking through the process, but if you happen to come across a consultant who didn't treat you fairly, you can call and make a complaint. Simple as that. It's our licensing agency, and they try to keep the industry honest. The Bear County Tax Assessor Collector, they do a great job of helping as well, but you have to understand their role in the whole appraisal process, which is zero. They're not part of the appraisal process. They are the entity that represents the majority of the taxing jurisdictions which individually set the tax rates. So they are merely the collector, so to speak. Yes, Bexar County in and of itself is a taxing jurisdiction that has its own governing body, the county commissioners. But your taxes are determined by a combination of the appraised value, which is set by the chief appraiser of the county appraisal district. Once that value is set and exemptions are taken out and any other adjustments are made, your assessed value is transferred over to the tax office, and they apply the applicable tax rates per the taxing jurisdictions that apply to your individual property. So you may be in the Northeast School District, some other people are in San Antonio, and so on and so on, but they're the ones that distribute all that. And a combination of those two is where your property taxes are generated from. So both sides are really good at saying, hey, it's not me that's raising your taxes. It's the appraisal district, and the county says, oh no, it's not us, it's the appraisal district. They do the values. Well, they're both right and they're both wrong. It is a combination of both of those jurisdictions that ultimately reach the taxable value of your the property taxes of your property. Next slide. I think, is that where we're on questions? How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think that's it. You guys covered it all.
Yeah.
And you know, while folks were watching, we got some really good questions. And so I do want to make sure that as I'm asking these questions and talking to you guys, that Noah on our team is monitoring the questions also, because I'm gonna be talking and listening. And so Noah, if you can send me the last 4, that'd be great. So I do want to just jump right into it. There's a lady named Pam online who has asked, due to my high risk of COVID, maintenance and upgrades to my home were not done. Can the same issues that I brought up last year be used this year?
Yes. It all determines, Pam, on the state of the house on January 1st. So it's good to show pictures, and if it's possible that they may have given you a condition and that's still on there, but by all means, that's a worthy topic to bring up in your protest.
Right, with the market values going up, absolutely. If the condition still existed on January 1, even if you use those same conditions in a prior year, absolutely, you need to bring it up, because ultimately, what would your house sell for on the open market on January 1? So if you needed a roof last year and you still needed a roof this year, the appraisal district is going to assess the value at their opinion of what they think the market is. But it's up to the property owner to make sure that they understand you still have conditions that would detract from the overall value, that overall price that a subsequent buyer may pay.
Okay, good. Pam, thanks so much. That was a great question. Javier asks, why do we have to do this every year? Fellas, I think the answer is because that's the way Texas law is written. Do you guys disagree with that?
No, I agree with that. Yeah, each year stands alone, and basically they're judging from the prior year sales. So that's why it possibly changes every year.
Right. I mean, by law, the appraisal district only needs to reappraise every 3 years. That's according to the Texas Property Tax Code. However, with a robust, we're talking residential market here, and it really applies to any property category, but especially with a robust residential market, and provided the appraisal district has the staff, they're going to reappraise every year, because number one, the taxing jurisdictions rely on that revenue. It is part of their job, and their job, whether it's an appraisal year or not, is to appraise that property at their opinion of market value as of January 1.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some neighborhoods that they may roll what we call roll the values from one year to the next, simply because it might have been a manpower issue where, hey, we focused on this section last year, Northeast San Antonio, and don't quote me on that because they go all over the place, but they may say, okay, we did Northeast last year. We're going to focus on this section or these neighborhoods this year. That can happen, but right now they're staffed up. They're ready to go. And if there's a lot of market activity, they're going to go after it.
Okay. Sarah asks, now when looking at BCAD's evidence package, how much weight does the number of bedrooms or bathrooms carry on what the county is showing versus your home? For example, in their evidence package, they use the property that has 4 bedrooms nearby, and mine has 3. Does that hold a lot of weight and make a big difference?
It's going to make a small difference. That's not going to be as important as the classification they have on your house and the size and the age. Those are probably the big 3. Off on the grids that they present as evidence, they won't even show the number of bedrooms. That's kind of a behind the scenes. So it is a reduction, but I would say that it's a minor change as compared to the other.
Yeah, I agree, Jerry. They're going to look primarily at the overall square footage. Some people prefer a 3-bedroom, at 2,800 square feet, and other people are like, no, I need to squeeze as many bedrooms out of that house as we can for, whatever purposes. So, but generally speaking, they're looking at it from a price per square foot standpoint, and number of bedrooms. Really, it can, but it's really not going to tip the scales any one direction. They technically, in true fee appraisals, where you go out and hire an independent fee appraiser, that appraiser is going to make those appropriate adjustments, but they're generally not going to account for a whole lot. It's nothing you'd want to go hang your hat on.
Okay, thank you. Good question. And now Rico asks, if I purchased a home at lower than market value after January 1st, am I eligible to protest my appraisal?
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of touched briefly on it. You really should get, as long as it was a true market transaction and it wasn't, your brother-in-law or something that sold you the house. If it was on the market and you purchased it for less than the appraisal district, they really should lower it to that. And that has been their operation. They'll typically give you your purchase price if it was in the current year.
Got it. All right. Well, Helen wants to know if photos were submitted last year or previous years, are those conditions used to adjust this year's assessment, or should they be resubmitted?
It's hard to know. I would say resubmit them. You always want to submit what the current January 1st condition is. But just to speak kind of inside terms, you may have an appraiser last year that saw your pictures and said, yeah, I'm gonna knock off $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever they gave you for that condition. But there's other appraisers that may actually change the condition on your house based on that. So it's hard to say for certain because you don't know what appraiser did what. But if they change the condition based on the pictures and you send the same pictures again, then they may not give you reduction because that was kind of permanently put on there, if that makes sense. But there's other appraisers that will just do it off the cuff, take it off the value and do nothing behind the scenes. So that's why we recommend to just submit it every year.
Right. And the appraisal district has, they're very sophisticated. They keep electronic files, so they should have last year's information readily available, but that's not always the case. But they technologically speaking, they have it in house. Now, whether or not they retrieve it in the following year, that could be an individual appraiser's decision.
Okay. We've got a question from DL Vega. This is an interesting one. Where I live, most of the houses with an over 65 exemption have much higher appraisals per square footage. How can that not hurt the other neighbors with their valuation? What do you guys think about that?
Well, that is one downside in the law that the over 65 residents really have a reason why they don't want to protest because of the port situation that I touched on. And so that does make it to where the neighbors really can't use. And so when that situations arises, and some neighbors you just can't because the majority are over 65, but you really want to have the appraisal district remove those as comps because of that reason. Now, some appraisers might, others may not, but that is a very valid point. And so, oftentimes I'll say, well, my comps are not using over 65 residents and yours are, if that's the case. But that is a very great point to bring out if it exists.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sarah, Sarah, thanks so much for checking in. It's nice to see you on here. Sarah says, do you recommend one way or another for the formal hearing to be more successful? In other words, over the phone, in person, if they allow that, or by affidavit?
Gary, in person seems always best, but with COVID concerns, I think the phone is better. Affidavit, they're going to read your evidence in, but there's no passion behind it. We have had success with some affidavits, but the majority of the time you want to have at least phone or in person.
I would agree, Jerry. I mean, at the present time, they're not allowing in person unless I am aware that some appraisal districts, even I believe Bear County, they did allow some in-person formal hearings, but their timeline was put way off. I mean, where normally we're resolving valuation disputes in June, July. They were having some of these hearings in December, and some have still yet to be heard. They really don't want to do it. Their doors, are not open. So yes, in a perfect world, that face-to-face, like Jerry said, is the best option to have because you can show your conviction. You can show. You got to be careful with the emotion because you don't want to go in there and plead an emotional case because they're used to it. They've heard it all. They've heard the people crying why they can't pay the bills and so forth. And they, I feel bad when you listen to countless hearings, 50, 60 hearings a day, they become calloused. And so they want you to be concise and to the point and factually based. So there's not a better way to present that than in person. But in light of the times, the next best thing would be to do that via telephone, where just like we are today, without the video, that information has already been provided to the appraisal district. So they're in front of them, they're looking at the information that you had provided, the pictures and whatever evidence that you provided, and you're able to talk through it and say, well, if you look at on page 3 or page 4, or if you look at my pictures, that's the next best thing. So the affidavit, like Jerry said, boy, you're sending a piece of paper to talk for you, and there's nothing behind it. Sometimes they can be a little ambiguous or hard to interpret, but it's just a piece of paper saying what I believe my sales are, my market value should be X amount because of these sales, and that's it. If that's the only way you can do it, then by all means, at least preserve your right. But that would be, in my opinion, the least desirable way to appear.
Okay. We've got a question from Taylor. This is an interesting one, Taylor. She says, I rented my house to a family that seems to have only eaten shrimp and other crustaceans when they live there. I hate the smell of shrimp. We can't get the smell of shrimp out of the house now. Can I bring up this bad smell as a reason why the value of the home is less than it was last year?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Put yourself in a prospective buyer's position. When they walked in, are they going to smell nice warm cookies or biscuits baking in the oven? Are they going to smell an odor that's noxious, that just drives them right outside of the house? Absolutely. Now, how do you quantify that? How do you present that? It's difficult. How do you put a dollar value on that? That could be difficult, but it is absolutely a condition that is real, and you would have to come across to the appraisal district that that condition existed on January 1. So therefore they must take that into consideration. We've had odor complaints before, usually when you're sitting next to a landfill, although that is more of a stationary or static condition, because that landfill typically doesn't move. But nevertheless, when those prevailing winds are blowing in your direction, it might make your neighborhood or your house less desirable because you have to deal with those odors. So
Gary,
nevertheless,
you ever had a shrimpy house case?
I've never had a shrimpy. I would, you know, how to quantify that. You would, if you had someone come and clean, by all means, you would have that estimate. That would be a very,
Yeah.
We have had dead body cases before where, yeah, that is a condition that's very real.
You know what I'm wondering is whether anybody watching us right now has got some bright ideas about dropping some shrimp under the. All right. Well, thank you, Taylor. You've got a problem with shrimp. Got it. We've also got a question from DL Vega again. How much for a residential property owner to use the SWBC AVTA services for protesting property taxes?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so DL Vega mentions that there's something called the SWBC AVTA services for protesting property taxes, and she's asking, you know, how much does that cost?
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that word. AVTA, Valorem Tax Advisors. Is Jerry, you agree with that?
yes.
Okay. It can vary based on what how much work we think is involved with that property. Generally, the higher the value of the property, the more work involved, the more time and effort. So it's I won't say it's a sliding scale. The lower the value, the more room we have to work. But it's hard to tell. We really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
There's not necessarily a one price fits all, but we would encourage anybody who is interested, share with us your information, and we would be happy to talk to you about our services, or something else that you know that we can still provide you with that help at a rate or at a budget that is suitable to anyone.
Okay, great. Priya Darshi is asking, is there a human touch to all this, or is it all computer algorithms determining the initial appraised value?
Great question. Jerry, you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's another reason why you want to protest every year, because it's really computer based with mass appraisal. They're just entering the sales into the computer, and it's spitting out really the notice value that you get, and so oftentimes the district's own equity and market perhaps grids will show a reduction. It's because the mass appraisal is done in mass, and then when you look and zero in on your house, sometimes even their own evidence will show a reduction. So that's why you want to you know, protest every year, and really just the system we have is really set up to that. For the appraisal district to take an individual look, they really have to do it during the protest time, because they don't have the time to look at each individual house before a notice is sent out. And
right.
So it's mass appraisal initially, and then the protest time is really zeroed. So there is personal touch during the protest time, but initially it is basically computers that are generating your value.
Right, which is very different from the appraisal that you commissioned when you purchased your house. That appraisal was done to justify to the lender that the money that they're loaning, the property is worth it. And so that's a fee appraisal where their blinders are on that particular property. And as Jerry said, the appraisal district has to employ a mass appraisal concept, which if you look at that in context, they only have so many employees in a short time frame to appraise, oh gosh, over 700,000 parcels in a given year. and it's impossible to see every property. So yes, they will analyze the market statistically, but it's up to the appeal process to fine tune that value.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Thank you. Now, Richard and Javier had very similar questions, and here goes. Besides checking data on sales in the neighborhood, aren't the appraisers supposed to conduct a physical visit before deciding on a new appraisal? And how can I go about requesting the appraiser to come out to my home and appraise it?
You can at the informal. They usually you would probably want to do that now before, because once the hearing season starts, they're not going to inspect your property for this year's hearing. But oftentimes, if they have some measurements wrong, and they don't, they use the aerials a lot now. They don't actually inspect too much. They'll have certain neighborhoods where they go and send appraisers out. Right. They'll have permits. They get all the permits that are pulled. And so if there's a lot of permits pulled on your house, that may trigger an appraiser to show up and see what's happening. They don't have, the appraisal district does not have the right to enter your house. And so that's something that really you have to grant permission for. But they can measure your house from an aerial, and then that can be difficult. And so that's why there's some errors. But if you did want them out, that is something that you could arrange kind of in the off season, which would be fall, winter.
And then that would be the time, Richard and Javier, to make sure to have some shrimp handy, I guess. Right? Okay. The Mary Trotter's asking, what is porting, and how are protesting exemptions changing for those who are 65 and older?
I touched a little bit on that. Porting is somewhat of a complex, basically when you turn 65, they put a ceiling on the majority of your jurisdictions that charge you tax. By law, the school district has to put a tax ceiling on your property when you turn 65, but the city and the county, they all get to vote on whether they do that or not. So we're lucky in San Antonio, the city and the county all offer a ceiling, just like the school district, whereas in other cities, their city and counties do not. So when they turn 65, their taxes still go up because of the jurisdictions are not offering ceiling. Here in Bexar County, the River Authority, which is very minor, and the health system are the two that don't offer a ceiling. So when you turn 65, your taxes will still go up because of that health system tax, but it's a very minor portion of your overall tax bill. But porting is, and the example I use is you turn 65 and let's say you're paying $100 to the school. Then that's your ceiling. You'll never pay more. It can go down, but it can't go up. So that people refer to it as a freeze. But if the market did take a dip, that value could go down, but it can never go up. So technically it's a ceiling. $100 you're paying. Let's say when you turn 70, you should be paying $120 if there was no ceiling, but you're only paying $100 because of ceiling. Well, then if you move, you get to port the same percentage you're enjoying. The tax code is written in a way that they want you to enjoy the same percent discount that you got when you turned 65 for the rest of your life. So if you move, you get to port the same percentage over to the school tax, which is the majority of your tax, and that term is called port.
All right. Well, this next question is fascinating. Helen Herrera Cheever says, if an existing house is moved onto a property, how does BCAD determine the age of the structure? And I've seen that, as a child, the very first time I've ever seen someone remove a house from a property, roll it down the road, and relocate, a house somewhere else. Have you ever seen anything like that, fellas?
Absolutely. The house still never loses its original year built. Okay. It doesn't matter if it was just relocated to a different lot. So the better you can verify the actual age of that house, which may be pretty evident, that it's built in the 30s or 40s or whatever. Just the fact that it was relocated to a different lot really shouldn't have an impact on the value of that structure.
Okay, good. Susan wants to know, what is your experience with success when you don't accept the formal and you go to the next step?
It's hard to put a percentage on it. If I had to, I would say, Gary, I don't know, what would you say? Board success. I would say 40%.
Yeah, I was thinking anywhere from 40 to 60%. Definitely not 100%. You can get some appraisal review board members in there who are not listening very well, who are not paying attention to your evidence presentation. They may have ulterior motives, but nevertheless, I think anywhere from 40 to 60%, provided you feel justified and you're able to document and demonstrate that the property is truly deserving of an exemption. They'll quickly realize if you're there just purely on an emotional basis and there's nothing to substantiate the claim, but if you can clearly demonstrate that if you were to place that property on the market as of January 1, that it deserved a decrease in value from what the appraisal district generated, yeah, you should win, and they should be very receptive to the evidence that you do present.
And just qualifying success, I think the number is higher in that if you do better than the informal offer, I would say the percentages are higher. But actually getting the number that you feel, I would put it at lower 40, 46.
Right.
But you can do better than the informal offer. I would raise the percentages on that.
Right. Property owners and tax consultants tend to always look at the lower side of the spectrum and value than the high side. So we're trying to get a fair market value. I mean, that's the objective, but yeah, the appraisal district is the other way. They're going to always look at the bright side of things, and in its best case scenario, hey, here's a high end of the sales spectrum. They may default to that higher end, not necessarily the middle, or definitely not the low end.
There's a friend of ours online whose name is Reshme, and Reshme owns and operates a medical clinic. And she had a fascinating question that, she'd been there her office had been there for 2 years. And then 2 years later, a hospital was constructed, and now they're charging her a hospital proximity fee. Have you guys seen anything like that?
Hospital proximity fee.
I've never even heard of a hospital proximity fee. That might be a
emergency service,
municipal discussion, with the city or county. But from a property tax perspective, that could go either way. It could have a positive effect on a property, or it could have a negative effect on a property, depending on how you look at it. If the hospital, I'm assuming a hospital just moved in, was constructed, they may have acquired the land at a very high rate, and that's going to potentially affect the property values of the surrounding neighbors. Or the fact that there's a hospital there and it increased traffic, it made living next to a hospital less desirable to live there. That too, in its use as a single family residence, to me, that would have a negative impact on a value. So again, you got to look at what are you looking at it for. From a pure residential perspective, to me, I think it might have a negative effect. But if you're looking at it for potential commercial development further down the road, where they basically just scrape the house off and now they've got a nice piece of transition land, then the value could go the other way. But I've never heard of the fee. Appraisal districts don't charge fees, just to be clear. They're there to set the market value, period. Any other fees, they simply, the tax office nor the appraisal district, they don't have the legal authority to assess any fees.
Well, Reshmi, thank you so much. And, it sounds to me like, Reshmi, that you need our team to follow up with you to see if we might be able to help you with that. And And also don't forget, these fellas don't run a charity. They actually help thousands of people all over Texas. And, you can call Gary and Jerry, and I'm sure that they might be able to help you out when it's time to protest. Fellas, I wanted to circle back because all of us had these horrible freezes, right? We all experienced a lot of pain with that polar vortex, the snow apocalypse. And a lot of folks think, surely, the broken pipes or my broken, air conditioning or my broken water heater, whatever, is something that I need to mention when I protest. And you and I were having a discussion before this, and I know you covered it in your presentation, but it's so important that people remember that may or may not get you some traction at the Bexar County Appraisal District. So in layman's terms, can you cover that for us one more time? Because I want to make sure people understand. And by the way, Reshmi's here, and now she's saying, I pay $56,000 in property taxes. Reshmi, I think you need to talk to these fellas for sure. And so let's walk through us one more time again, what to do and what kind of documentation we need to take, and whether or not I can get any traction with a busted pipe because of the freeze case.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, outside of the exemption that Gary speaks to, kind of the example again is January 1st is the technical deadline, and so if you had a pipe that burst, just my own house, the hot water froze up, so I had to change had to turn up the heat, and then the heat blew out. And so technically I think that repair is possibly given some weight on January 1st because we didn't have to run it that high, so that could have been existing already. So you kind of have to make some special cases like that outside of the exemption. Now, just straightforward, if you have the 15% threshold, then you're going to want to do the exemption route. But there are, I always tell our clients, you want to bring up anything that's negative. And for instance, we use the fire example. If something burned down in February, you still have to be taxed because January 1st is the deadline. But they do take a more, I don't know if it's kinder eye as what was the condition of the house. It burned down. You can't have pictures of what the condition was, but obviously it was a house that burned down. I mean, I have those every year, and so while you still pay tax because it was there on January 1st, it seems like they're more giving on maybe a condition rating because obviously the house burned down, and so those are angles that you can take with the pipe damages. If that fits into that category. Otherwise, you'd have to go the straightforward exemption route.
All right. Now, last question, fellas, and I'm going to let you have the closing arguments. So I'm going to tee it up for you. Do you or do you not agree with the following proposition? If you don't protest your tax appraisal, you are guaranteed to not get a discount. Gary, take it away.
No, we can't stress enough that the advice we give all our clients, no matter what your value does, the over 65 is the one exemption to that. But you want to protest every year, even if you think you can sell your house for that value. You want to make sure you're being treated equal and uniform, and you just want to get a good market look and an equal and uniform look on your house every year.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got to speak up. You've got to protest that thing. And that's not a slide against the appraisal district. They actually encourage property owners to protest as well. They know that they don't have the ability to look at the individual characteristics of each and every property. So it is incumbent on us to make sure that we do our homework and prepare for these things. Take those pictures in advance, get written estimates for any repairs, and generally speaking, what make ready or what would I have to do to command the highest value possible if I were to sell my house or property on the open market. So you establish a market value, but then you detract from whatever factors, physical depreciation or obsolescence or any other factors, smelly shrimp, that any factors that would detract or cause a potential buyer to not pay at that market value level. So again, you've got to do your homework. You've got to put it in concise order. And like Jerry said, you've got 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes max for the entire hearing. But your presentation alone, you've only got 5, 6, 7 minutes, if that. So you've got to be straight to the point. Don't mess around, because these guys, from their point, they're tired. The appraisal review board, even the appraisers, they hear every type of complaint possible, everything imaginable. They've heard all the untruths or all the claims that haven't been substantiated, and all the reasons in the world. And we see people crying. When we got to go down there, we would see people crying because they came in empty-handed and they're begging for reductions, but they're not providing the appraisal district to evaluate that. And they can't just feel sorry for you and give you something because you showed up for the effort. They got to have something to put in the file. And because they too are being graded on their performance, they too have to meet certain thresholds, that they're within a certain percentage of the appraisal ratio studies when the Texas Comptroller's Office does studies on them. So they've got to watch their back too, to make sure that they're doing their job. So if you want success, go prepared, bring your evidence, be concise and to the point. And if you do all those things, you have a very strong likelihood of success. You can and should get a value reduction if you do those things.
Folks, here's what I tell my clients in my law practice. If you want to go to court and win, you got to show up with something more than the following argument. Come on, that's not an argument. That's not a legal argument. And at BCAD, at the appraisals, I tell you, I've seen it also. Almost everyone walks in and says, come on, are you crazy? You must be crazy. Come on is not an argument, right? An argument is, this is the condition of my property. These are the comparable values around there. I think you guys got your math wrong. This is historically what it's been valued at. And be ready. Treat it like a case of law, like a law and order court case. Show up.
You do.
With copies, and make sure you show up that it's legible and you don't want copy stains on your documents. Treat it seriously, right?
Absolutely.
All right. I learned a lot today, guys. Every year you blow it out of the water. Thank you so much. We also learned that if your house smells shrimpy, it might just work. So throw the kitchen sink at these protests. Gary, thank you so much for everything you do. I know you're working super hard, and you gave your time away today to our District 8 constituents.
We're happy to do it.
Thank you for helping your neighbors. Jerry, I really appreciate you very, very much. Thank you so much. And it's nice to see you, and we'll see you next year, right, guys?
Absolutely.
All right, guys. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you.